All right, let's get started, and I'll kick us off today. So just so we're all kind of caught up on the state of play, as far as I can tell, Sam Altman and Greg Brockman have both joined Microsoft to lead their new research team. Emmett Shear, who was the ex-founder of Twitch and was at Microsoft, is now the new CEO of OpenAI, and it looks like this was basically a mix of like the conflict between for-profit versus non-profit missions, or kind of like the pragmatic Silicon Valley tribe versus the EA alignment cult ideological tribe. So that's kind of the parameters of this. And it still looks like it's going to shift around a little bit, the situation, but it feels like it's more settled than people think. I don't see like I don't know, many more major movements happening. People have been making like major commitments, like moving to Microsoft or hiring a new CEO are not like trivial things you reverse in a week. So I think, I don't know, 70% of the equilibrium has settled. And like a lot of people, if you see Twitter commentary, you kind of see them saying that it's still very unsettled and moving around, blah, blah, blah. But I don't think so, actually. Like, if you look at what's happened at OpenAI and who's on the board and who they hired, so Emmett, I would say, is like ideology cult adjacent. He's not quite full-blown doomer, but like I would say doomer light. So if that's the case, and anybody who's like more accelerationist leaves and joins the Microsoft team, this is basically going to end up as OpenAI will be kind of like a it may not remain a nonprofit, but it might, like, even if it gets structured as like a more regular company, it'll still have the doomer light vibe. It'll move more slowly. It won't aggressively like develop and release products. It'll, like, somebody estimated like 80 billion worth of market value being given up by this move, and I think that's not far off. Like, so they'll basically cede market leadership to companies that are willing to be more aggressive and accelerationist. And I think Microsoft just signaled it's joining the tribe. So the market structure, I think, will be OpenAI will still be a fairly potent force since it has a lot of momentum and like historical capability. And a lot of people do subscribe to the EA alignment tribe. So they'll continue to do stuff, but they're going to like slowly slip in the lead and fall back. On the forefront, I think it's still going to be Microsoft, Anthropic at the lead, with things like Meta and Google kind of bringing up the middle. And I'm calling them the middle because even though they have like both the technical chops and the capital and like honestly the big stockpile of GPUs, because they're existing old companies with their own internal bureaucracies, they're not going to be either like a pure startup accelerationist aggressive, nor are they going to be like, an ideological cult. They're like basically big company bureaucracy, so they're going to act like that. So that's the spread. So Altman at Microsoft, I think, is the interesting wildcard because Microsoft is a big company, but in this case, it's like such an unprecedented situation. It looks like they're almost providing shelter. So I suspect whatever happens, they'll give Altman's team a pretty free hand at Microsoft, maybe even spin it out as a separate entity or something. Point being, I don't think Microsoft will try to impose some, mainstream Microsoft culture on whatever Altman starts. And if they did, Altman wouldn't tolerate it. He would probably like spin off and like get back into somewhat startup mode. So that's why I'm like separating Microsoft's position as not like Google or Meta. Like, even though they're a big company, they're going to basically be backing an internal startup, is the sense I get. And then everything else is, of course, bringing up the long tail. Like there's a dozen other companies in the fray, but they're like minor players, like not counting like China and things happening in other countries. So that's kind of my read of the situation. But the one additional point I'll add is, I was just in Istanbul for a week. Anuraj was also there. And it was kind of funny being in the historic city where the early Christianity basically found its roots. And so I'm reading this great book called A Tale of Three Cities by Bethany Hughes, and it's about the entire history of the city. And the part I'm reading now is about how in early Christian times, when it was still like a marginal cult and being oppressed by Roman emperors, and then Constantine converted to Christianity and basically made it a state religion. By the way, the statistic was interesting. Like before Constantine became emperor, Christianity was like maybe less than 15%. It was a fast growing cult, but still a minority fringe cult. But after his reign, 50% was Christian, at least in like the immediate vicinity of the empire. So that tells you that these things can like go past the threshold very quickly. But yeah, that's what strikes me as what's going on. Like even though we are in very short term, play by play, confusing events, I think what's being set in motion is like really long term, like decades to centuries level dynamics. And since there's a kind of like religious faction playing a major role here, but the interesting thing I'm speculating about is this going to turn into something like the Catholic Church or the Eastern Orthodox Church, or is it going to like go back to being a fringe religion and die out? Because all three were possibilities right after Constantine's reign in early Rome. Like though he pushed the religion during his reign, after he died, the next emperor, I forget his name. I'm reading about him now. He kind of like went back to paganism, which in my view is kind of the equivalent of like the accelerationist tribe here. So it's kind of like up in the air where the long-term religious dynamics will go. But I'm hoping it doesn't actually turn out to be significantly religious, and all these like fringe cults, whether it's the full-out accelerationists or whether it's these alignment ideologues, they kind of like diminish and fade, and basically more practical people kind of take over and run the show, which is roughly what happened in both branches of Christianity, if you think about it. Like, even though there were fringe cults shaping the influence, the core institutions of both ended up being like state bureaucracies, and they were run by relatively pragmatic people who were like pragmatic about politics and stuff. But that said, they were religions. They were not like, atheistic corporations. So you can't pretend that either Eastern or Western Christianity evolved as a not religious thing. So I think the same is true of AI. Whatever happens will have like competing religious narratives to it. So that's my take, and let's go up. I think Sachin is next.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's very interesting to read, and um, it, I sort of didn't pay much attention to the news over the weekend, um, and was catching up this morning, and um, interesting. They mention how the alignment people or the field, the AGI people wanted to like thought of Chat GPT as this way to understand how user behavior uh, or like how users use AI and what they use it for, um, because that feels like it feels like the kind of thing that like a more authoritarian version of like what Facebook was doing with its data with like ad tech. But I assume that everybody in like AGI feels morally right to uh, do this with ChatGPT, and um, so it's kind of funny that nobody like it's always funny to me when people who um, who say they want to do the good thing or are the good people end up doing mm, evil things, essentially, or like things that feel yeah. So that part caught my eye about the how the alignment people wanted to track how people were using AI and impose rules based on that. Um, and also this sort of like ideologue versus pragmatist, or like idealism versus ideologue or idealism versus pragmatist thing seems to be happening like across tech. It feels like even with crypto stuff, one of the other internet people had done sort of a, I thought it was very well written, this long piece about the history of the other internet and how he got into it because of this idealized version of a peer-to-peer internet existing, and all that, and how when that met the actual reality of people in crypto who are sort of in it to just make the money or to make number go up, uh, there was too much friction, and he felt like nothing was going to happen. And I feel like and I'm not sure about this, but my intuition is that that polarization is much more than it used to be before. Like earlier, you had the sort of like Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak archetypes, who sort of tolerated each other, but now both like the sort of like idealism or ideologue versus pragmatist group doesn't seem to tolerate each other that much. So um yeah, and I guess that's where, and that's what makes it um makes this also what gives this sort of this religious undertone, um and because everybody feels they are the good people doing the right thing or something. um and yeah, I can see a path for like the alignment people to be have a lot of say in things, because there is a, outside of tech, there is a general malaise against tech, like even like in the writers strike and things like that. uh, One of the things in the writers strike was curbing the use of AI, or something along those lines. um, and so there is a general malaise against tech that can be weaponized to for passing regulation, um, uh, or just gaining more power in general. Um, yeah, um, and uh, yeah, I think that's all. Jenna.
Thanks, Sachin. Yeah, couple of I can be quick. One of the places in the Atlantic piece that really caught my eye was some of the nitty gritty about how they've just been barely hanging on during the last year as it exploded, with like just keeping things running. Um, and that we now have a collection of the Datadog story, and I missed last Monday, but the other meltdown. So the whole piece about when will GPT make all programmers unneeded? And that's of course not true. It'll never happen. But they're going to displace a whole bunch of mid-level programming, we know. But the people who can really keep these massive systems running, when will AI be able to kind of just do that in a self-referential way? Pretty interesting to think about. I almost suggested New Yorker had an interesting piece last week, maybe, by a guy who is a programmer, and he was really nicely articulate about how he was hostile, and then has started playing with it, and then you end up just being, well, what's the smart way to use the tool to make your grunt programming work better? So a lot of that feels pretty resolved. Um, so that's one whole nexus that that OpenAI itself was close to meltdown many times over the last year. That just their own technology. One of the other threads that's on my mind is when Greg and Sama go to Microsoft, the IP questions. So, of course, there's no NDA. I don't think they can put an NDA on you when you get fired. or when you quit. But isn't everything they've done must have been under some sort of normal work for hire constraint? So they can't just take all the marbles and go to Microsoft with them. And I haven't seen, maybe I missed it, but I haven't seen that discussed yet. Just sort of the basic IP questions. And the other thread that I just think is really interesting, and I appreciate, Venkat, that you just made this the topic for today, is once in a while something really does happen where you can be aware of, like, oh yeah, history is happening right now around me. And to what extent do you pay attention to it? Just so that you can be there when things happen. I can't change anything, but to at least know something about what's happening in the moment when it's happening. And I will note I think, Anuraj, you posted that tweet from Greg Brockman, and I noticed that our friend Paul Millard was the first reply guy. And that's kind of like, okay, so he's totally paying attention to what's going on right now. And on the other hand, maybe it's better just put your head down and go get your own work done. Like your own work that needs to happen is probably more important. But it is fun once in a while to just pay attention, right, to history as it's happening. I think those were my threads to pull on, and so I'm going to pass it to who's up thread of me, Grigori. Here you go.
It is kind of funny that we actually have discussed the governance structure of OpenAI several months back on governance call, which happens on Friday. And even back then, it was kind of obvious that the government structure is problematic. But now the whole world can see the issues with this type of structure, with this type of for-profit, non-profit differentiation. The big issue is how do you fix it? The way the discussion is currently going doesn't make me very optimistic, because the problem is really very complex. The main issue with the current version of governance structure is that it creates a class of superhumans, namely the board, who is charged to decide on unhuman-like issues. For example, whether AGI is achieved or not. And as recent events have shown, this type of structure is kind of unsustainable. You don't want to have a small group of people feeling like they're superhumans, that they're deciding the way the world turns, basically. But how do you create a governance structure that is capable of making such decisions, but still consists of normal people, of humans? I don't have an easy answer for that. The other observation I have made reading the article is that the government structure cannot be fixed in time. And again, based on the Atlantic article, it was created in 2015 and then modified a little bit in 2019, which is a long time ago by artificial intelligence standards, meaning from 2019 and even more from 2015, and lots of things have happened, and capabilities of the systems they are developing have grown many times over, so they could not have estimated how far they will go up to now. So they didn't know what to expect back then. And it's frequently the case when the government structure is falling behind. You create it at one moment, but then you are busy developing the technology or traveling the world, being on a world tour, giving speeches in interesting places. So again, if you want to have a really operational government structure for companies like OpenAI, it has to be flexible and it has to be maintained constantly, not just left behind. Back to the prompt, where the situation is going in the medium term. It's hard for me to predict, but I believe that humans will remain humans. And probably this is a main obstacle that we have encountered in developing this technology. Meaning that probably the development of technology will slow down now because of situations like that. And I will pass it on to Ben.
I don't really have much to say. I'm mostly just here just to try to get other people's opinions because I really don't know anything about this. Archive is not working for me, so I wasn't even really able to read the article. Obviously, I've been following it on Twitter. Surprising how much sort of talk has been about it. It just seems like a pretty standard, they had a weird governance structure, ended up empowering some people who were ideological, and they threw the guy out. And he's probably, a billionaire, so he'll just do whatever he does next, and things will continue evolving. Going to Microsoft, I'm not sure how it will actually stay there. I suspect it'll be like maybe Microsoft will just try to capture him with some kind of he'll be working in some kind of internal company. I think this is what Venkat said. I suspect he might, break with them too eventually because, it's big business. It's going to be in a certain bureaucratic, capturing way. And if he really wants to try something new, but who knows? So yeah, I don't really have anything to say or speculate about. I'm just here to listen mostly. I'll move on to Anraj.
Yeah, floor is open, and I think the two interesting points that were raised that nobody's talked about yet is, Jenna, your point about IP, and I'm wondering if anybody has insight on that one, and Sachin's point about the pragmatists and idealists seem to have become less tolerant of each other in this latest tech cycle. So both of those seem like interesting open questions to me. On the IP front, I think one of the in pieces of like input data is that there's very little patented stuff here. Like initially in the first 6-7 years of deep learning research, everybody was publishing openly, sort of like open academic research. So I would say 80 to 90% of that material is like basically open anyway, so there's no issues there. And since the last few years, most companies have been basically keeping it as trade secrets. So trade secrets are only like by definition protectable until they remain secret. So there's no like official protection like in patent law. And the fact that some of this is happening in California also shapes it, because there's like, I believe non-compete agreements are not valid in California. So it'll be very hard. Like, yes, they'll obviously take some, I don't know, deep knowledge with them wherever they go, but I don't think it can be policed. So my sense is it's kind of like open season on IP, but I could be wrong. But yeah, more thoughts?
Venkat, can you say something about then what happens, who can have a moat? What kind of moats do any of these companies have then? Anthropic, for example, has been mentioned a lot. How do you protect, what's the business model? And we talked about that when we read the Brockman, I wish I could remember what it was, but we read something about this when they broke up, when they split the governance.
There's basically only two levels of moats going on here. One is owned by NVIDIA with its CUDA infrastructure, which is a low-level base everybody builds on. So really, NVIDIA is the only player in the picture with like a serious moat. But at the AI application company level, from what I understand, most of the secret sauce is in going from like a small model capable of running on one powerful workstation to models that require like a cluster of like 1,000 machines or more. There's a lot of secret sauce in managing memory and data movement across like 1,000 servers and stuff. So that's the secret sauce. And it seems to be like in people's heads mostly. So it's not clear how much of that can be distilled into anything. But at the level of like just how the model works, the theory of it, the practice of it, at the level that a single person can do it, it's basically effectively open source now. I mean, Andrej Karpathy has been doing like live stream broadcasts of building the equivalent of like GPT-2 by himself. So really, NVIDIA CUDA is one moat, and a couple of levels higher, it's knowing how to run these models on like 1,000+ machines.
Thanks, that makes sense.
Yeah, I was going to add about sort of like the polarization between like pragmatists and idealists. I wonder how much of it is sort of like the medium of sort of like the medium of conflict is always like platforms such as like Twitter or that have this sort of like winner takes all dynamic, and I wonder, it's sort of like that's the medium in which it happens. So you have to have extreme opinions or extreme versions of your ideology, no sort of like middle ground sort of thing. And I don't know how that will evolve or change.
So one way it might evolve is by analogy to ancient Christian history. Again, I'm making that analogy again. Like in ancient Roman Constantine's time, the equivalent of the big four platform companies were the like official state pagan religious sort of like pantheon. So gods like Jupiter and Minerva and there's a few others were like very institutionally backed gods, as in like they had roles in like the city's official ideology or empire's official ideology, and they were very they represented very conservative values, that kind of were very pragmatic, that allowed the empire to govern itself and like run its big machinery and so forth. So somehow I feels like maybe I should make this a meme and try to write an article about it, but the pragmatic, market-oriented, let's just build products and make money philosophy feels like the paganism in the picture. So the old Roman paganism that was replaced by Christianity is kind of like market pragmatism. And this analogy, I think, suggests that it's by no means a done deal that pragmatism will prevail, because you know what happened with the history of Christianity, right? Like the Roman Empire, both East and West, kind of like completely transformed and turned into, basically, there's the Holy Roman Emperor in Western Europe and then the Eastern Orthodox Church, and both were like much more strongly and unpragmatically religious than the old Roman Empire. And you had like, history from like 400 to I don't know, 1200, which was much more religious in character than commercial, and something similar to the old Roman commerce kind of like ethos didn't come back until I would say the 13th or 14th century, with after the Reformation. So my point here is, yeah, it could be that the medium is the message. So now it's like social media creating radical ideological sort of like landscapes. Back then, I don't know what it was. Maybe it was like improvements in post-Roman transportation technology or whatever it was. But for some reason, the old Roman institutional platform religions didn't make it. And the two flavors of Christianity did, and later Islam joined the party. So I would call that part of the same party. So there's three fairly conservative strains of religion that dominated the landscape for 1,000 years. So I would say there's a chance that happens here, which I'm not happy about, but I think could happen. Also, the point Garu brought it up, the connection to crypto is really interesting. I find it really weird that both in crypto and in AI, a fringe group associated with the EA alignment ideology has caused like a major like meltdown event. So Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX on the crypto side, with his weird EA thinking, which I believe was sincere. I mean, he's going to jail, and that's like a rough outcome and stuff, and he deserves it. But still, I mean, I think he was serious about all his many worlds EA kind of BS. And here again, the situation has been strongly shaped by the same ideology. So it's not just AI. The entire tech world is being infected by this new culture war, I would say.
Yeah, I think. Again, I feel like most EA people, again, it's sort of like the medium is the message sort of thing of like they are good at. I feel like a certain type of verbal intelligence, or like verbal jiu-jitsu of some sort. And I sometimes, and this is like a cynical take, but I feel like that is why AI doomers are doomers. Like ChatGPT replicates their sort of verbal intelligence, so it's almost like a threat to them or something. So, like, so so I feel like the medium favors their sort of approach to conflict.
Yeah, that's a sick burn. That if I put it even more crudely than you did, it's like AI ate the word cells first, and these guys are primarily word cells. That's one way to think of it. Yeah. Another similar thought I had was people who aren't like down in the weeds actually building the technology and are kind of like reacting to it with second order philosophy, which is like most of us. They tend to project their own sort of like shadows, Jungian shadows onto it. So it's like their self creates like a particular strength and a weakness, and they project that. So it's like, so think about it like, if you have a hedgehog personality, you will project a hedgehog character on the nature of AI, and you'll fear that it'll become this aggregated Skynet type thing that'll become superhuman and kill you. If you have a more fox-like personality, you'll have a foxy shadow. You might think of like a million little frictional things happening. So I think there's a strong element of that going on, where effectively, if you're not hands-on technical, you will kind of like project your personality or via the shadow onto what's going on. But the interesting thing also here is that this happens to highly technical people as well. So in this picture, Ilya Sutskever is clearly one of the pioneering tech people in the picture. So his conversion to the cult is a non-trivial piece of this equation. And another person in the picture is Adam D'Angelo, who was the tech co-founder of Quora. I think he's also kind of similar. And that's something slightly different going on, where if you're like, I don't know, precociously genius talented at a particular narrow technology, you kind of like become, I don't know, obsessed with it. And then anybody around who's like spouting some plausible sounding philosophy about it, you'll kind of latch onto it because you yourself are too busy, fully devoted to hands-on building the technology, and you have not like given adequate attention and thoughtfulness to the philosophy problems. So you latch on to the most convenient cartoon philosophy around you, which is, I think, so two things are happening. So yeah, there's like people who don't understand projecting their personalities onto the technology, and people who do understand being too busy to form their own philosophy. So borrowing the latest, nearest cartoon philosophy they can find, which is both bad in their own ways, but that's what's driving the situation now, I think. Yeah, totally. I think, yeah. That's an interesting question. Like, I think part of what goes on is success breeds wealth and sort of like surplus. So these are basically successful people who make a lot of money out of their success and then sit around wondering what to do with it. And maybe all of us are like equally cultish, but we just don't have the money or power to act on our cultish beliefs. But in these cases, they kind of like almost get unleashed. It's like they're free to pursue their weirdest, insane fantasies. So one potential solution is to simply make sure that nobody gets that stinking rich out of any technology that they can basically and hang their freak flag out too strongly. But on the other hand, any effort to control how rich people get, it turns into the other kind of like ideological capture, which is like, some way of flavor of communism or something, and that creates its whole different subgroup of religion. So it's like you're caught between a rock and a hard place. So my guess would be you want a governance structure that allows people to become rich but not too rich, and maintains some equality but not like I don't know, ideological levels of communist equality. So you want like, maybe that's the key. Basically, I'm saying that what brings sanity to a picture is basically the middle class, which is people who are neither labor and all equal and poor, nor billionaires getting weird. So middle class people with their bourgeois sensibilities tend to bring like a very mediocre, plodding, I don't know, pragmatism to stuff, which the extremes hate, but maybe that's what stabilizes the picture.
So one thing I'm not 100% sure I agree with that, because I mean, Eliezer, I think, was middle class. I don't think he's rich or poor or whatever. And he's sort of the genesis for a lot of the EA stuff. So I mean, maybe it's the rich that that he was able to find fertile soil there to grow his sort of ideology. But the generator doesn't seem to be someone who's like so incredibly wealthy.
Yeah, that's true. Though I think he did get enough like very significant wealthy patronage. So Peter Thiel picked him up as early as like 2009 or something, I think. So he's been basically comfortably living off like a significant, in the orbit of significant wealth for quite a while. So a lot of more of his philosophy has been developed in proximity to wealth and surplus and plenty than you might think. So it's not like he toiled for decades in obscurity and poverty developing this stuff.
That's true.
Yeah, yeah, I was going to say the same. Like, it seems like he has had patronage of like rich people for a while. But also, to make one more Christian analogy, in that sense, it's all like a lot of the EA, ACC are like ideologically motivated people seem to be sort of like, I remember we had a reading about the Jesuits and how the Jesuits would sort of like uh, latch on to like lords in like kings or lords and be their consultants, sort of like ideological consultants. And that was what enabled them to like travel sort of across the world and spread the ideology. And so like so this sort of like feels like that of like one like the rich people need an ideology because they don't know what to do with all this money, and so like these are sort of like ideological consultants of some kind. And I don't know, like I would say the middle class is like the bureaucracy or something, but everyone hates bureaucrats now. I don't know what role the middle class played in that time, or like what the appropriate analogy there is. Um, um, but yeah, that would be interesting to think about.
Yeah, that's an interesting thread we should pull on more, the Jesuit thread, because if you look through that lens and sort of analyze the ideological consultants around right now, there aren't any Jesuit types yet. So it's all like much more intensely and non-pragmatically ideological consultants are all over the landscape. And if you look at history, the Jesuits came along in the Counter-Reformation, so almost 1,000 years after the origins of Christianity. So you had the original Catholic and Eastern Church sort of shaping the landscape for 1,000 years. Then you had Martin Luther come around, and that's what created like the political sort of like allegiance battle of like all these small kings and barons having to pick Protestant or Catholic. And that's kind of where the the Jesuits became like the McKinsey of Catholicism. And they were actually super famous for exactly this kind of like very pragmatic, say what the patron needs to hear kind of approach to religious consulting. So yeah, I think, but since everything here is happening on an accelerated time frame, like people were joking that if when it was likely that Altman might return to OpenAI, then they were joking like this is like Steve Jobs took a decade, and in this case, it would have happened in 2 days if it had happened. But that tells you the degree of acceleration. So if the Steve Jobs return was a decade, and this is could have been 2 days, that's like several thousands times faster. So maybe we'll get to the Jesuit stage of this story 1,000 times faster, which would be, I don't know, a few years. All right, a minute left. Anybody else have any closing thoughts? All right, see you next week. And I'm glad we recorded this one. I'd like to revisit this conversation in like 6 months to see how right we were or wrong. All right, see you guys next week. Next week.